For those who are online, thank you for being here. We've got people from all over the country, and we've even have some international guests. So thank you very much for being here. Come on in. I love it. We've got a packed house here. My name is MacKenzie Price. I'm the co-founder of Alpha School, and I am so excited to be here. I will start with just a little bit of a story, and my mother is in the back, so she will vouch that this is true. Growing up, I was a good student, but I hated school. I was always that kid who would raise my hand and be like, why do I need to know this? What's the point? And how is this going to help me in the future? I was motivated because I wanted to get into a certain college. I really wanted to go to Stanford University. That was my goal. Now, if you'd asked me, why do I want to go to Stanford? I had no idea. It didn't have anything to do with a major or something. It was just like, I want to be there. And I will tell you, I had a phenomenal experience at Stanford. And so it is really a pleasure for me to be here on this stage at this school, getting to interview a dean from the Stanford University. It's really fun. It makes me feel like an A+ student, so I'm very happy about that. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the Dean of the Graduate School of Education, the #1 globally ranked education department, Mr. Dan Schwartz. Dan, will you come join me? Yes, come on up. This is a special audience that we collected for you today. I always say our most valuable asset is our children, our students. They are amazing. Central to the success of our model are our teachers, our guides. But what makes the whole world go round is parents. And I am a firm believer that anybody who kind of raises their hand to say, hey, there might be something beyond just the school that, the school bus drives by my house and takes them to. I think an engaged parent is kind of the #1 best thing. What do you think? Do you agree?
It depends.
Ooh.
So, no, there's actually a literature on this.
Okay.
That some parents like to be really involved and some don't. And they just trust the school to take care of it. And so if you don't respect that, you kind of get into trouble. But yes, a parent who cares about their child's education and doesn't sort of over-manage their child's education, best thing. So congratulations, all of you.
That's one of the core tenets that we tell our parents is that they will support, not solve, that failure is fuel. And so there's a lot of things that we are kind of teaching our parents about how to help their children be successful. But we're going to kind of geek out a little bit today because what better time to do that than with someone who is a preeminent researcher and a geek.
Yeah.
This is a book that I will say this is called The ABCs of How We Learn that Dean Schwartz wrote. The fundamental kind of learning science principles here are so much of what this school philosophy has been built upon. There's been so much there, and one of the things that I think has been very exciting about the model we've developed is finally being able to take some learning science principles and put them to action. And so I think a lot of people might wonder, like, what is learning science and what's been our general experience with the education system?
Those are two whopping questions. So let me do the easy one. So a lot of people have intuitive beliefs about learning. And you talk to people and you say, having someone standing in front lecturing to you for 90 minutes may not be the best way to learn. We can do better. And the common response is, well, I learned that way and I turned out fine. Right? And I sort of say to them, well, it didn't work for everybody. I don't say to them, you could have been better, right? So education's sort of filled with these things got just handed down. Like word problems, I'm not quite sure who invented them. I'm not sure anybody's ever tested whether they're good, but there they are. So in the last, I would say 30 years, people have actually made learning a kind of something that you would study. In fact, the discoveries from the study of human learning is what made all the new AI systems, right? They're sort of based on discoveries from there. And some of the interesting discoveries is like learning's not a single thing. So people often think of learning, it's one word, so it must be one thing. It's a lot of things. So, the way you learn your values and your affect is really different than the way you sort of learn your multiplication tables. They're different systems. It's like the immune system. And so you have all these different systems that handle new things, handle recurrent things. And they all have different appetites. And so the trick is trying to figure out what's the right instruction to fit the appetite of that kind of learning, and what's the right kind of learning for the thing that the outcome you want. And so there's been a lot of progress on that, but it's been very hard to actually get it into the world, in part because everybody says, well, I learned that way and I turned out fine. And so this is a big challenge, is to try and figure out how to get what we know out into the system, right? And so someone like me looks at AI and I see everybody's excitement about it and they want it, and I'm thinking, this is the place to put the learning science, because everybody's going to adopt the AI.
Yeah, we finally have an opportunity to implement these principles in a very pure kind of environment, right? Yeah. And we do that. What do you see AI, how do you see AI changing or disrupting education?
Well, it could go two paths, right? One path is that, the systems are based on the past, right? It's what was on the internet fills these AI systems. And so people make tools to help teachers make curriculum. And so what the AI does is it's always didactic, because that's what's on the web, right? Those are the examples. Someone just basically start with a 30-minute lecture or something like that. So you can't imagine the AI comes along, and what it does is it automates all the old ways of teaching. And so this is a concern of mine. It's kind of why we started the accelerator at Stanford, that you have all these not leftover, but hand-me-down methods of teaching, and the AI automates them, and it's really tough to get. It'll be tough to get them out.
That's one of the things that I find a little bit frustrating. We get a lot of press about our schools, and often, the picture, the graphic will be a robot teacher standing in front of the classroom, and it's like you're missing the complete point. Right?
The fact that they're always standing in front of the classroom drives me nuts.
Yeah.
But so I was talking, I was getting my tour of Alpha, which I've been curious and never seen before. And I was talking to one of the students who was actually using the AI the way I think you want to use it. And that's to create things. So there was a student, I'm not sure I'm going to get it quite right, but basically to help study, I forget what the subject was. It might have been chemistry or it might have been history. She basically worked with the AI to write songs. And the AI helped to write songs to help her learn the chemistry or the English.
It was U.S. history, and I think Hamilton both. Part 2 is coming out, thanks to some of our Alpha students. Yes, back there. You guys might be asked to perform at the end, so get ready.
So I thought that was a great example where the students are using the AI the way the adults are, which is basically to make stuff, to augment their abilities, and rather than sort of replacing teachers in a system that doesn't work, this is a chance to do something really different and you learn a lot by making stuff.
Yeah. One of the things that I think we've really valued is that for us, we're using AI to create personalized lessons that go at the pace and the level and do goal filling. Do you believe that the system is able to adopt that on a wide scale? Let's even just start on what scale. What does AI enable us to do when it comes to measuring learning and applying learning principles? Yeah,
so the AI is going to be very good at this. This is actually old. So about 25 years ago, they made AI tutors, areas like algebra, things that had rule bases, simple rule base. And, if you get something wrong, it can figure out based on how long it took you to answer other questions what you missed. So they can't figure out the area, the outside of a square, and it tracks down and realizes they never were in perimeter, something like that. So that ability has always been there. What the new AI has done is made it so that it's a lot easier. So before you would have to do what was called knowledge engineering, and you'd have to work out every little detail and what are the dependencies. And the new AI enables you to do that. So I think this is, it's not new, it's something we can finally do in a fairly easy way. Can schools accommodate this? It's going to vary by the nature of the school. Some technologies really got into schools fast, like YouTube. This thing got adopted right away. If you had a laptop and a projector, every school, every teacher uses YouTube. The face value of it is so high. The personalization, I think it could get adopted quite well if all the kids have laptops. Mm-hmm. We still do, in public schools, we still do age bands. And so that's going to be a challenge to let kids go ahead, or if the kid has fractions kills a lot of kids, right? And so they're in 5th grade and they never learn fractions. Can you back them up? Things like that. And so you need school designs that enable you to do that. But I think the tutoring aspect will get adopted very quickly. After COVID, the rate of tutoring in the country just exploded. And now the AI can do the tutoring. So I think this is one place it'll show up. One last thing is the research on the tutoring is if you're bringing tutoring into your school and the parents are from low income, the tutoring's got to happen in the school, not at home. So the school's got to adjust, and they're already doing this. They're adding an hour to the day where the kids can get tutored. So the public schools might adapt.
Do you buy into this idea that we very much propose that, learning has become more efficient when you are receiving this one-to-one mastery-based tutoring experience? That's why we're able to get the results we do in a couple hours.
Yeah.
Do you think schools on a wider basis will be able to understand they can compress the day versus adding time?
I don't know. I'm not a school. It's hard for me to say for all schools. I think if it's like YouTube. It's like my ability to show planets orbiting the sun from all these different angles in motion compared to a flat picture in a textbook. Everybody recognized that was really good. So if you can get the tutoring or the personalization in a form factor that people can recognize, they'll immediately go for it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that the challenge is it's a bit of a structural problem. Right. So your school is kind of set up to enable this. These different speeds and catching up and getting ahead. Other places, it's tough to do that.
Yeah.
So I think the large public schools, the big urban districts, it's going to be hard for them.
Yeah. I think we need to show that there's a path for where that works.
I think that's right.
So the dean and I have been having a lot of conversations around just what artificial intelligence is going to enable when it comes to implementing learning principles. And one of the things I think is that, the School of Education is going to become much more of a science-based department as opposed to kind of a humanities. Hard to measure. In the past, learning has been hard to kind of objectively measure how kids are doing, getting accurate information on how your student is doing beyond a report card every 8 weeks. What do you think about that?
So in defense of schools of education and of the humanities are good. You want people to question what is worth knowing, humanities. At the GSE, we've got all of them. We've got cognitive neuroscientists, economists. So we do a lot of empiricism as well. So that's just, me prickling a little bit. But so a big challenge in education is the lack of data, right? So we look at the kids, and what do you get? You get grades, and you get a standardized test once a year. It's just not enough to know what's going on. So the AI is really good at collecting all sorts of, being able to analyze data. So I can put a camera in the corner of the classroom and it can tell me the emotion of every kid. Not with super subtlety, like it doesn't distinguish ennui from boredom, right? But it knows happy, sad, angry. So this is pretty amazing, right? And once you have that kind of evidence, you can start to make theories and then look at the effects of interventions beyond a narrow test that you might apply. Mm-hmm. So I think the learning science and is really good. Psych departments do a lot of this. Education departments do. The thing that the education departments do is they figure out how to render it into instruction. Here's something that's incredibly impressive. So education is a huge enterprise, right? It's the second largest sector after healthcare. Yeah, it's 3 times the global outlay for education and all military expenditure. So it's a really big enterprise, and so there's a lot going on besides just what's happening in the classroom. So one of my favorite examples is actually disabilities, where the AI can actually help quite a bit. So I have a colleague that I collaborate with. He's a pediatrician, and he took Google Glass and trained it to be able to recognize facial expressions. So I'm looking at you, and it can put up sad, happy. So for children on the spectrum wearing this glass, getting the label of the emotion the other person has gives them the confidence to engage. And once they engage socially, they can start to develop neural pathways. So having done this, he's now collected all this data through Google Glass, and he's made a game. Ellen DeGeneres has this game. You put a cell phone up here, and then your job is to show me somehow what's on the cell phone. So he has the parents play this game with their 3-year-olds, and the phone can detect if the child has some sort of neural disability, like autism. And then once it knows that, it can start changing the content so that it starts working on very specific things like looking at the person's eyes, right? Really important for... And so this is an amazing thing because it's a behavioral problem. There's no biological marker for it. And so you generally don't know it until they're in 5 or 6. And by that time, the neural pathways have kind of settled down and it's too late. So he tells me that when he's done with this, he will be able to make it so that 40% of kids who would have otherwise not been able to participate in society will be able to participate because he's getting to them in this fun game at the age of 3 or 4.
That's incredible.
So this is a big space of education. Right?
Yeah,
it's
early intervention is amazing in what that can do.
Another example is in California, at least. You don't test reading until the 3rd grade. The idea is they've had to have learned how to read, and then you can test it and find out it didn't work. Of course, that's a little late, and so he figured out how to do a 5-minute gamified test they can take down to 5-year-olds. And now California has mandated, and he's been adopted, and now this poor guy has to go to every school district to explain what this tool is and how to use it. And so we're trying to figure out how to help him. Because like a good professor, he's really creative, used the science to make a breakthrough, but this guy does not know how to scale, right? It's just not what we do. So these are examples, I think, of data helping you sort of figure out what's going on, much more precise understanding. And there's a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, you have an analogy around what I think AI is going to do for
you.
Education.
You're the one who gave me the analogy.
From you too.
Her analogy, which she's about to explain to you, is why it is microscope is to biology as AI is to education.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing that's so exciting. And for parents who've got kids at one of our schools, you see that you're able to go into your dash every day as opposed to waiting for this time. And that's what's incredible is just that precise measurement and testing that AI enables gives us so much more information. Yeah. I think we believe that, education and the learning science that we can now incorporate into this, those principles in the next 10 years are going to be more transformational than what, as we've said, what, the telescope was to physics or the scale was to, chemistry.
So a big challenge, you brought this up earlier, is getting people to believe there are alternatives. So, for example, you could probably make a really good video game to teach science. And so I was collaborating with this guy who did this. And basically, the students are trying to determine the structure of alien DNA, which really pissed off the scientists, right? Because there are no aliens with DNA. But that's okay with me. I think the kids understand it's a fiction. And they go in there and they're sort of using virtual tools. But because it's a video game, everybody's like, that's not school. That's not learning. And so helping people understand there's other ways to do it besides sort of the lecture and the problems at the back of the book, I think that's a challenge.
Yeah. One of the things we're doing some 2-hour learning intervention in public school settings. And basically there's a certain class of, if your kid is remedial to the point that they need to be pulled out for special education, we can come in and work with them. And so if you think about 50-minute class period, our whole thing is, okay, we'll do 25 minutes on math, and then we'll spend 25 minutes letting the kid pursue some interests that they have. And that's been the struggle that the public school administrators are like, wait, it's 50 minutes, don't you need to do 50 minutes of math? Right. And we're like, no, the magic is in that we're giving kids time back to work on something they want to do, and in that 25 minutes we can tutor them.
So I would love to run the study to see how much time kids are actually working in any given class.
Yeah.
Right. And my guess, in a 50-minute class, it's not 50 minutes. There's 5 minutes to settle down. Open your books. There's another 5 minutes. So I don't actually know how much of that time. But yeah, if you said we're going to call a spade, and they're 25 minutes, just do something, good, and then we'll concentrate on this. It might be the exact same amount of time they work.
Yeah.
2 hours may be how much they work total.
I think that's true. My older daughter called me after her first econ class in her freshman year of college this year, and she said, "Mom, I will totally come home on your podcast and talk about, why the lecture-based classroom is so inefficient." She's like, we got 5 minutes of material in that 50-minute class, and it could have been covered in an email, right? Now, she also met a really cute boy in that class, so I think she would call the class a success, when it comes down to it, but that's what we have. You're running the Graduate School of Education. You're training the next generation of educators and leaders in the classroom. What do you see is going to be the changing role of teachers, and what are you preparing them for?
Yeah, so there's a challenge. If you're preparing them for a large public institution in California, you need to spend a lot of time helping them figure out what are the best ways to work with kids whose parents don't speak English as their native language, right? And so there's these other kinds of challenges that you want to work on. You think the AI could be a big help, right? For kids who English isn't the parents' first language, the AIs could just help your English language skills a tremendous amount if you do the instruction correctly. But I think the real challenge is sort of what's happening now will be different in 5 years, right? So it's moving incredibly fast. And so I think what we're trying to do is give the teachers some way to orient themselves towards the AI, how you think about its capacities, but also have some understanding of what's going on underneath a little bit, not too technical, so that they'll be able to adapt when the next tool comes out. But over 60% of teachers are already using the AI tools in school, right? And so what we do, our school in particular, is we made something like an AI makerspace where it has sort of all the AI tools, and then there's a very talented person who we get the teachers to walk in there. Teacher says, "Would you like to see how you can make a beautiful image of this?" And so we start to expose them to the possibilities. And then hopefully they'll be able to be creative with it. That's our approach. Right?
That's very cool. Well, you talk about that a lot, and I think we've talked about it today in various places at school, is the ability to make something, right? That is hugely powerful, and everything from project-based learning to learning how to be a creator and a contributor, not just a consumer, and what we can do with making. You have a great example that you shared about one of the ways that one of your colleagues is incorporating AI in building architecture plans.
Oh yeah. So this is she's pretty crazy in general, but she's not going to watch this, are you? Please. So she has students make their blueprint, and then they put the blueprint in a CAD system, which makes the building, and then she takes the building and puts it into a physics engine. So the building can now represent gravity and walls and barriers. And then she takes the student who made the blueprint, puts them in a wheelchair inside the building. And they roll around and they sort of experience, what is it I've just created for these other people? What's really magical about that is it sets up the students to then understand why you have all these rules about the size of openings and doorways. And so this is, I think, the big challenge for the instructional designers. How can you have them do this creation stuff that sets up their ability to learn algebra? Right? Can you make it so that what they're doing and they're creating paves the way for them to get a deep understanding of formal content, like, doing a regression in statistics or something. Yeah. So that's the challenge. But it's really good. We have another group where the CS professor and the professor who's sort of written the book on belonging are co-designing an environment where girls can make video games in science as a way to get them interested in science.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll work, but it's a bold idea. I just want to see how they set it up so the kids can make the video games in science.
Yeah. Well, it's allowing, I mean, that's one of the things we're seeing too, is kids are having so much more access to being able to code, to build apps, to use AI to, as we say, give superpowers, right? And use it as a tool for building, not just a search engine.
Right. Well, right. So people are sort of on their own time, they're sort of making stuff, but then when they try and tell other people what to do. I had this amazing experience. So in universities, a big issue is freedom of speech versus academic freedom. So academic freedom is basically faculty can teach what they want to teach and study what they want to study, and they're allowed to speak in their expertise. Anyway, I'm just having a terrible time figuring this out. It's really complicated. And so the dean of engineering sends me the output from ChatGPT that she asked it. And I read it, and it sort of makes no sense to me. Didn't quite answer the question. And then the provost, who's a constitutional lawyer, independently sends me another ChatGPT output on free speech versus academic freedom. And I sort of realized the story is all the people are experts. They don't want to teach it anymore. They're going to have ChatGPT do all their work for them.
No.
Don't want that. No. So I scolded them both. Right.
Well, so here's a question that I get asked a lot, and it's usually from a young mom who's looking at putting her kid in one of our schools, got a 4-year-old, on there, and says, okay, in this age where I can find anything on the internet, what is my kid supposed to do in their 13 years of school? What are they supposed to learn? What is important for them to focus on? What's your answer to that?
So I got a couple. The first one is a tremendous amount of the discourse around this is dominated by industry's fascination with skills. And so we talk about skills, and it's always a complaint that the university is not preparing the students for the job, which always means you didn't teach them how to do our exact skill set for our company. Mm-hmm. But that language of skills has shown up, and of course, that's what the AI can do. It can sort of mimic skills. What the discourse is missing is that, the reason you learn is so you can appreciate things. And so you go to a museum and there's this great painting by Van Gogh. It's not like you want to put the AI in front of it and say, appreciate it for me, mm-hmm. right? You need knowledge to be able to appreciate it. And a tremendous amount of our experience is that way. So you don't want to hand it off. You don't want the AI to appreciate a sunset for you. And I don't want the AI to appreciate why what you said is so interesting, mm-hmm. right? So I need to know enough to be able to do that. But my second answer, I was ready for this one, right? What do you need to know? So I think people underestimate how much you need to know. They say, well, ChatGPT has all the knowledge. So I'm going to do a demonstration. We'll see if this works. So I'm going to read a passage to you, and you hang on, okay? So the procedure was actually quite simple. First, he collected all the items into one group. He might have had to use another place due to lack of facilities, but the usual facility was going to be enough. He arranged the items in different groups. Of course, one pile might have been sufficient depending on how much he had to do. So you can understand this at the word level. You even understand it at a sentence level, but you have no idea what it's talking about. Now, if you have good prior knowledge, if you've gone to school and you've been educated, and someone says, this is about washing clothes, let me read the passage again, now that you have some background knowledge. The procedure was actually quite simple. First, he collected all the items into one group. He might have had to use another place due to lack of facilities, but the usual facility was going to be enough. He arranged them into different groups. So you underestimate how much knowledge you have when you look at the output of AI. If you don't have that knowledge, the output from AI is just going to be a bunch of sentences and words. And you might think you understand, but you don't, right? And so my answer about those of you who have 4-year-olds, don't worry about it so much. It's going to be okay. Is you're going to need to know the same things you've always known, right? You're still going to need to know what proportionality is. You're still going to need to know germ theory, right? What we saw with the introduction of the calculator, unfortunately, was you needed to learn math and the calculator. And so that's sort of going to be the story, right? So you're going to need to know all the same stuff you know. You're just not going to need to know it to a level of automaticity. in a lot of things. So reading, you're still going to want to be able to see words and automatically go dog, right? You don't want to be sounding it out. But for most things, you don't have to get that proficient. But you still need to know it so you can interpret. The new thing you're going to need to know, if I've got it right, is you're going to need to know how to create stuff, which involves iterating, taking a chance, getting feedback, all these other kinds of skills that are different than, say, critical thinking. They're involved in sort of trying to make something new and interesting. Yeah. So that would be my story.
I think the thing that gets me so excited is that we now have the ability to truly, just cram so much knowledge into a kid's brain. And I always believe the more that's hanging in their brain, the more they can draw from. The ability when they do that, and it's become efficient. One of the reasons we say we've got this academic rigor is because it's not that hard anymore to do. To provide people with great knowledge when we're able to, cater to their pace and their level of understanding, and it makes your brain a more interesting place to hang out.
I'm trying to decide, do I like hanging out in my brain more after I've read something hard? So I do think we can help people get knowledge, and sort of an interesting thing is if you're in too much of a rush to get it in there, the knowledge is brittle. So you don't want to get over-automated. A big challenge is if you sort of learn the wrong way, you presuppose the answer in any question you ask. And so a great example of this is the tomato. So a bunch of engineers got together and said, we've got to figure out how to make a machine that can pick the tomatoes without crushing them. Right? And so they worked on this and they got a little bit better. But they presupposed the answer. How can we make a machine? One of them finally talked to a biologist, and the biologist said, well, why don't you just make the skin thicker? Which is actually what happened. So the tomatoes with the thick skins, it was the biologist. Turns out the gene that controlled the thickness of the skin also controlled flavor. So they're sort of working on that problem because your Roma tomatoes aren't quite as flavorful. But anyway, it's an example of where they had a strong body of efficient knowledge, but they learned it in a way that didn't enable them to escape it and see there's other ways. So that's kind of the risk of if you overstuff people, right? They may be too stuck with their stuffing and not see there's like appetizers or something.
Well, and actually I think that's a great example of the way that we're going to have to look at incorporating AI into education, right? We have to be willing to open up our perspective a little bit and not just try to layer it on the way we think it should on that. I want to open this up to questions. We have a mic over here. So if anybody who has a question, please come up to this mic and feel free to line up. The other thing for those that are watching virtually, we're going to be taking virtual questions as well. So if you have a question and you're on the virtual audience, please put that in the comments and somebody in the room will be reading those. But let's go ahead first.
I'd like to ask, because I think we talked before about the fact there's a lot of inertia in these academic institutions of this ecosystem, and we see really great innovation that's occurring here at the kind of elementary school, middle school, and high school level. Why don't we see that type of innovation deployed in academic institutions of how they're teaching their students, especially considering that they're some of the most innovative organizations in the world?
By academic, you mean higher education?
Yeah, our children will graduate from Alpha at some stage and then they'll run straight into, unless there's significant reform, even at a highly innovative institution like yours, a very traditional university experience. Can you kind of help me understand why that's the case and what we can do about that?
Well, here's the glib answer. You have people who've been very successful for 25 years. They have lifetime employment, and everybody thinks they're the best teacher. So it's hard to convince them to change. So my solution is sort of say, would you like to see this possibility, like this AI makerspace, and then they begin to see it. There is an interesting forcing function going on in higher education. So as of last year, 60% of the students are using it, but only 30% of the faculty are. But the place the faculty are using it is to write letters of recommendation. Right. Well, yeah. I mean, you got 50 undergrads, So it's tough, right? Stanford, their approach, they get small seminars. You have these capstone projects, so they do a lot. The place it's not so good is the big, large lecture hall classes, right? And part of that's cost. So there's 900 students who are taking intro computer science. What do you do with them? The teachers are teaching that. They're computer science professors. They're bringing in really interesting AI to the students. So I think it'll change. I think there's a good forcing function. But, I've been teaching for 45 years. I've got my yellow pad, and I've got that example I really love. But PowerPoint, everybody adopted PowerPoint, so maybe there's hope,
Next question.
Thank you so much for
Yep.
what you've shared. Thank you so much. So I'm a parent of an alpha child, and listening to this, I've been working with AI for several years. And the question is, what is the future we're preparing our children for here, right? All the leaders, Demis Hassabis, Daria Modi, Sam Altman, they're all saying that we've got AGI in 2 to 4 years. That means 2 to 4 years, basically everything we're talking about here, no human will be able to do any of it. So it's going to replace all lawyers, all accountants, all finance, all government, all everything. You don't think so?
No, I want you to get to your question, but I know a lot of smart people, and they're not very good teachers. General intelligence doesn't mean you're going to be a good teacher.
So, yeah, I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen.
Okay.
I'm just saying all the
Okay.
leaders of the big AI platforms
Yeah.
are saying this.
Of course.
I've been using it for several years. It's just so powerful. Right?
It is. It's amazing.
So it seems to me, at the end, you said you have to learn to create, right? So it feels like, are we educating them for a world where it's going to be a purely creative environment, where they're imagining things and then just creating them?
No, hard to imagine. Here's a broader version of create. The thing that you're absolutely can be sure that you're going to need to be able to do is adapt. Things keep changing, you're going to need to be able to adapt. To adapt intentionally is a creative act. To adapt sort of reactively and sort of get forced in a direction is not. So you can think of creation as a little broader than sort of creativity. It's really sort of how do I take what's new in this situation and figure out what are the new patterns I should have for this sort of situation. And there are ways to teach people so their knowledge is more adaptive, so they're more willing to explore different alternatives, to stop them from being the engineers with a tomato. So that would be the answer, I think, is the one thing you know for sure is they're going to have to adapt.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure, it's a good question.
Thank you again. This is very, very helpful. And actually, I have a student that is looking to join the alpha community. So my question to you is, from a professional level, AI, I'm all in. I'm a commercial broker. We use AI to be able to do site selections and optimize for businesses. So it's fantastic. From a parent standpoint, there's a little bit concerns about, for this on my part, about privacy. So can you talk a little bit about privacy and what that looks like for you in terms of maybe protecting the privacy of the student and what that looks like in terms of like selling data to maybe like big tech?
Yeah, so they shouldn't be able to do that.
You said
They shouldn't be able to do that, right? And so there's laws that should protect that, and the law should become stronger. The place that shows up that's more problematic. So the companies that deliver a lot of this, they have all the data, and you sort of want them to give it to the researchers, so the researchers can make great discoveries. And so that's from my vantage, that's actually the concern, is that the people who have all the data won't be able to use it to do good things. And so is there a model where we can still have strong protections for students, but that data can be used for good and not evil, right? And so, but yeah, when I'm talking about, it's pretty interesting. At one point, I was asking parents, how would you feel if I put a video in the corner of the classroom and you could sort of like a Ring camera and you could watch your kid at any time, right? And they were like, oh my God, that's like an invasion on the kid's privacy. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting interpretation. They also didn't want to know whether Johnny was being a little rat that day. But yeah, it's a big issue. I think I'm hopeful the education companies are not trying to just increase the number of clicks, and then selling data and making kids, a lot of suits going on about this. Yeah. No, that's a good question.
I'm bringing a question from the online viewers, and the question is, how can we help our kids to be critical thinkers in their use of AI, by using their acquired knowledge to apply context and reasoning to whatever information AI is feeding them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So getting people to do critical thinking is tough in every situation, and I'm never quite sure what people mean by it. For me, critical thinking is the processes by which you decide what to believe. And so it's a much broader space. Do you decide to go read something else? But here's an interesting thing that's happening. So there's a computer scientist and a professor in the School of Education who studies small group work in math. And what they're doing is they're creating all these different agents that play a role in group interaction. So the agent can tell the student, be polite, but ask them why they think that. So this may be a way you could do it, where you could start getting the AI to help the kid understand, here's a situation where it'd be appropriate to ask this kind of question, right? So maybe the AI can solve its own problem, So I think that's interesting. It is the fact that the critical, so we do need to go after this. We saw this with the rise of the internet and social media. The belief, if the knowledge is there, you don't need to learn anything. Turns out fake news is, be nice if you knew how to decide whether you should believe it or not. So hopefully we can get ahead of it on the AI front in a way that we never got ahead of it on the social media. It's a good question. These are all great questions. None of them have an answer. It's great.
Hi, you just mentioned that with AI, you just need to, you need the knowledge to understand the output of AI instead of to become really skillful. So my question is, does this mean that in this area it's better for the children to learn a wide range of knowledge across the different fields rather than focusing deeply on one specific area, become a master of it?
I'm sort of a fan of the liberal arts, right? So my undergrad was philosophy, absolutely useless. Like I was going to apply to graduate school in the philosophy society, wrote back and said, because you want to be a taxi driver, right? So that didn't happen. But I seem to use it for an awful lot of stuff. I think that's going to be true for a lot of the breadth you learn. Again, if you get too narrow, it's going to limit your horizon and your ability to imagine alternatives. So I think good space. Now, once you go to graduate school, probably good to spend a lot of time becoming an expert at a very small thing. It's a different game. It's professional training, to be a researcher, for example. But for kids, yeah, I think they should take art. Music, maybe. I was bad at music, so I'm not so happy about it. Math, English, history, all this stuff. Do you have an alternative why it would be better for a kid to only sort of learn one domain?
Not for young children. I think I agree with you. Like from K-12, I think it's good for them to learn a lot of things. But I notice even for myself, I'm getting lazier sometimes with AI. For example, now I don't even write my own email. I just put down some key points and have Chat GPT to run it for me. So instead of learning how to write better, I'm just relying on AI.
That's shameless. You're shameless.
So I wonder if this will make the kids lazy.
It could if you did it wrong. But you already knew how to write emails. And if it writes an email you don't like, you're not going to send it. Right? So you sort of already developed the talent on that. But
what are the kids?
What
are the kids that don't know how to write emails?
Right. So we don't want to skip that. Right? We want to make sure they understand what it means to create a good composition, things like that. You don't want to lose that skill. The fear that the kids are going to do this, well, if you tell them don't, I mean, they're not going to do it as much, so it's okay.
Thank you.
I actually will say, I think one of the things that we focus on are not only are we teaching our kids how to write the 5-paragraph essay and do citations, but how to write the email, how to write the tweet. right? How to write, the shorter things, how to write the Substack newsletter. And I think what we're seeing is when we're having more time to develop those life skills, the ability to learn, to become an expert and adapt, as we talked about earlier, it does give time for learning more skills, a broader set of skills that are going to help us be successful.
So if I can just if I can just follow up. So a big concern is cheating. So just so you understand, 60% of kids in K-12 cheat, and it hasn't gone up with AI, right? And so the challenge here is you want to think of assignments where it wouldn't occur to them to cheat, right?
You kind of invited this question for me in talking about the distinction between academic freedom and freedom of expression, so apologies in advance.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to answer.
I
couldn't read their ChatGPT output.
But in regards to the notion of AI making so much more space for young people to be able to create things, and we're arguably in a time where there's never been more anxiety for young people around responsibility related to creation, whether that's the things you post about on social media or being scared to be associated with certain viewpoints. How do you see the relationship between there now being so much more room to create, whether that's expression or actual outputs, as it relates to this time where young people are so anxious to be associated with given, whether it's ideologies, movements?
Yeah, so you know the answer, right? So you want to teach them how to have civil and civic discourse, so they can engage in that. So you,
yeah,
so
I know, but I'm curious.
But I agree with you. I like your answer, right? Which is you need to help them.
Give a quick introduction of what you're doing with Alpha. We have somebody here who's going to be providing a great program for Alpha. Why don't you tell about it?
Sure, yeah. So my name's, this was not the goal of this, but
Wait, you come on up on stage here. No.
My name's Olivia Gross, and I'm the founder of a program called High School Law Review and Middle School Law Review, and we're thrilled to be partnering with Alpha. And we essentially provide schools with a standalone curriculum and online platform where students are able to agreeably disagree through the study of constitutional law. So I would argue that it's great to have, meta conversations about agreeable disagreement and this skill that young people need. I would argue it's impossible to teach head on, but you need really exciting vehicles for showing and modeling what it looks like. And we believe that the Supreme Court, what it means to respectfully dissent, showing that to young people is really important. So students at Alpha will have access to what kids in Fargo, North Dakota and South Carolina and all over the country, how they're thinking differently about constitutional law. But with AI, I think there is really interesting questions around when we create more room for students and space for them within the school day, what does that look like for relationships around the fact that, it wasn't that long ago that I was a young person on a college campus, and there's so much anxiety around being associated with given viewpoints, and we have to make space for young people to test out their ideas. I think Civics is a great place for that to happen in, but I don't know where the other places that it could also be happening in. So, yeah.
It's good.
That's super exciting.
Yeah, so we'll be coming to Alpha, all campuses next fall, so get excited. Any other questions?
I've got one. In terms of cost for education, we've seen it just skyrocket over the years. And even before AI came out, I was like, man, I hope I don't have to send my kids to college and just save some money on that end. And I feel like that possibility is more likely. And after them going to Alpha and seeing what Alpha offers through high school and how fast they can learn and master skills, like, what is your vision of what the future higher education looks like? Like, is 4 years of school going to be necessary with the advancement of AI?
Boy, great question. I think a lot of people are asking this. Sort of how can higher education evolve? Given a push towards very specific skills, for example, companies want very specific skills. So I think it's a good question. I sort of like things like a gap year, where you have students go out and sort of be in a non-sheltered academic environment, and then they come back and they really appreciate it. They get more. I do think there's some value of going to college and meeting all these people that are really not like you, right? Like, I remember when I went to college, there's this one guy. I would have never talked to him in high school. Turns out he was like the world's greatest cellist. right? I mean, this is sort of what college is good for, and you'd hate to lose that. I don't know that you can recreate it online. Maybe there was an attempt to do this, actually, to make a fully online college that was international, and I don't know how it's doing anymore. But
The only pushback I'll give you on that, yes, the college experience is there and the networking is there, but if you start in the workforce at an earlier age, you are surrounded by more mature people that you could still learn those skills from or get that networking and social effectiveness from board.
So there's some studies on this, like vocational training versus liberal arts. And you walk out of school with vocational training higher paid, but after 10 years you get lower paid, right? And so this is kind of the challenge. It's a friend of that question about should you learn a broad base or should you go narrow? So right now I think the jury on this is sort of leaning towards no, liberal arts is good in the long run. So all these Stanford students are getting computer science degrees. In 3 years, they're all managers, right? And so you want them to have had a broader set of experiences and ways of seeing the world and understanding it. But, college isn't mandatory. There's other things you can do in life besides go to college. I just happen to be in school my whole life, so I'm a little biased,
I love what you said about the way that you learn your values is different than the way you learn your multiplication tables. And MacKenzie, you mentioned something about measurement, the way that measurement's changing. So the current learning model is you memorize a lot of facts, right? That's what a lot of learning is. Then there's working through logical arguments, right? You write papers, you do those kinds of things. Now with AI, where the thinking piece of building a logical argument and working through those things is able to be done by AI, how do we measure learning in this new paradigm?
Because the students are going to use the AI to write it? Is that the concern?
How will the system be able to measure learning in this new paradigm? Does that make sense? It does, but I'm trying to put my finger on the question, sorry. One version of your question is you give them a take-home assignment and the AI writes it for them. And so I can't use that to measure what the kid really knows. Right. So is that the direction of the question? Yeah, because there's standardized testing and there's all these different ways that you basically say, okay, they've learned this much. But now AI can do all of that, so how do you actually measure what a student is learning?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of answers to that. The least exciting answer is we'll lock them in a room with no computer and have them write the answer, right? Or we'll do oral exams.
I heard Stanford brought back proctors this year. Is that true?
Yeah, it's not because of this.
Okay.
It's a different story. But blue books may come back. So handwriting's going to be back. A lot of schools don't teach cursive anymore. Suddenly you have to. I do think it's possible to create questions that are more appropriate for humans to answer. Here's a simple one. I just asked a question, and if all the students use AI, they're all going to write the same essay. And so I can tell, right? So you can do cheat detection. A colleague of mine who's a physicist, he sort of said, every physics textbook question the AI can answer, right? Get an A on the test. But none of those are questions that physicists actually try and answer, right? Most of the physics questions, there's a bunch of unknowns and you have to figure them out. If you ask that question, you really find out what the students know. The other answer is if they're on the computer, you're going to collect a tremendous amount of process data. And that's probably what you care more about is how do they go about doing it. And so you'll just be able to see how they learn, and you may not need a separate exam. But it's a good question. In the college, this is the big question, right? How you do that. I think telling them, don't do it, or if you do it, refer to it. Nobody wants to cheat whole scale. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, I really appreciate the presentation that you guys have given, or the panel discussion. And I just want to talk a little bit about ask you guys questions about the agentic AI front. And it's becoming very clear that all of us, including our children, are going to have a fleet of hundreds to thousands of AI agents that are going to execute tasks on their behalf autonomously, almost without question. And that kind of is an interesting thought when it comes to education and also like the workforce.
Right.
So when it comes to what the future of education should look like, I'm in the AI tutoring space with a company called Cognify, and we deploy these AI tutors that there is a personalized course expert for every single student, which is great, and they know about the student. It's one-to-one. But I think I want to get your thoughts on how the future of education could look, where the human kind of plays a role in that, because if people are going to have this power to command these fleets, every single person has their own fleet, it becomes very important to know why you're going to command them to do what they're about to do, and you need to know exactly what the task should be. So
you sound like the Graduate School of Business.
Okay.
They need courses in management and leadership.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you think that's where the human should be, where the AI can handle teaching people to what on an individualized basis, but we still need a reason to do what we're going to do, because you can't teach an AI model obsession or motivation or uniting behind a common goal. Do you think that's what the role of the human teacher is going to be?
I don't know. It's a good question.
I have answers.
Yeah, so I think there'll be a lot more roles for human teachers than the image of them in front of the class. And so in some models, the human teacher's a guide, and other models, the human teacher's saying, we need to learn this way to make a Gantt chart so you can get all these robots working in the right order. So I think hopefully it augments and opens up the possibilities for what teachers do. But, I'm just thinking about this army of agents and boy, my dishes are never clean. And so I like the future. I like that. I'm trying to think of so can you think of a skill I need if I have 1,000 agents, but I don't have a scheduler agent? I don't have a butler agent to control all my little agents?
Probably command your current agents to make a butler agent for you.
Very good.
It's exciting. We have time for one more question. We might have one more person waiting, right? There we go.
Thanks for coming, Dan, and thanks, MacKenzie, for Alpha and everything. I'm a parent of kids at Alpha. I'm also a game developer, and I've been using AI as soon as they give us tools for this stuff, but it's really only been even less than the past year that I've really gone all into what does education have to do with AI, and what is this future it's going to bring us? And it's really interesting to talk about the top 10%, the top 5%. It's like, wow, think of how much better that top group of students is. But the longer I've thought about it, it's dawned on me it's the lower 30, 40% that could really benefit from this. Like, how many kids that are slipping through the cracks right now? To me, that's the lowest hanging fruit of we can do huge benefit by making sure they're not missed and spotting learning difficulties early, getting them personalized tutors that could be AI, or just bumping them up to say, hey, you need to get a human over here helping this kid. So sorry, this is a long wind up to the actual question. But the more I think about this, the more optimistic I get about the future and what this is all going to bring, to the point that you say, well, what sort of impact will this have on society? And you've been thinking about this a lot longer than I have now. Do you have any musings about how this might reshape society in 5, 10, 20 years when we just have a much higher percentage of people that are well educated?
Yeah, I'm not a futurist too much, but just one of your points, one of the promises of AI and all the technology is it can really help with the tails of the distribution, which are really difficult, right? Because there's not a lot of people there, it's a lot of expense, and so there's a lot of belief that the AI is going to really be able to help the tails. So I'm really hoping it can lift the bottom, and the bottom is, it's Swiss cheese. There's all sorts of holes in different places. And I don't know, what a society of people who are learned and educated sounds good. It sounds a little boring. Like, dude, don't you want to just have a drink and watch baseball? But maybe we all sit around and talk important stuff. I actually think it'd be pretty good. The question, and the fear I have on that one is, are we going to hollow out the middle class? Right, so you're going to have the people who command the AI, and then you're going to have the people at McDonald's. right? And so that's the fear, is that this class of jobs, the AI is just going to come and displace them, and then so you're going to have the Brahmins over here, the super experts, and then the ones who didn't get the education and for whatever reason. But I don't know. We all sit around and are cultured and have good conversations, or we're willing to listen to each other, maybe. I don't know.
Hopefully the robots come as quickly as the AI does.
Yeah.
They can work at McDonald's.
So when you make your video game in education, because you're going to have to, right?
Maybe.
Yeah, you're going to have to. Here's the benchmark for you. Can the gameplay change to another instructional model based on what the kid's doing? If the kid's not passing the level, will the system say, oh, I should try and teach this way instead? And if it can do that, it's a home run, because there's no systems that do that.
Yeah, we'll make it. Don't worry.
Good. I knew it.
I said that was the last question, but I love Jamal, who's our Texas Sports Academy buddy. So this is the last question.
Thank you so much. This has been awesome. It has been incredible. I'm super excited about one line in particular that you said. You mentioned when talking about the relationship between skills and education, you can't outsource appreciation. That's like, I'm stealing that.
Good.
In the same breath, of all the parents that I talk to, I routinely get into these conversations of, the relationship of those two things, right? I want a good, sound, fundamental education for my kid, but who cares about trigonometry? Teach them public speaking. Who cares about, biology? Let's get some financial literacy. Is there, in the way that you view kindergarten through 12th in particular, are there any skills or opportunities that you think we can do at scale, as just for kids in general, that are a bit more valuable than some things that we do spend a lot of time teaching?
So there are wars about what goes into the curriculum, right? And so I have a colleague who really wants kids to learn how AI works, not in a super deep way. And so what he's doing is he's making one-day lessons that the teacher can put in social studies, or a one-day lesson on AI that's designed for a math class. So he's sort of figuring out a way to get the content in without getting in the fight. If I put in the AI class, do I have to get rid of the trig class? Right, so that's sort of the challenge in this space. It's really contested, what goes in there. Should we be teaching that? I don't know. I sort of Sakatoa. I don't know if you remember that, but A squared plus B squared. So those are tough. Now, if society decided we should teach a course in cognitive psychology, I would have strong opinions. And so what generally happens is you allow the experts in the field, usually at the university, to dictate what needs to be included in the curriculum. So the UC system in California, they have the A through G, and students have to take classes in this A, B, C, D, E, F, G sequence to be able to be admitted to the university. And so that's where a lot of those decisions get made. But I think you can slip in a lot of things that you think are important into the curriculum we have right now. We've just never done it, right? So can you use math as a place where students begin to sort of have intellectual arguments over the quality of the proof? Can you talk about the role of commercials in advertising in your English class? So I think there's ways to slip it in. Again, AI, I think, can do it, make things a lot of fun, get it in. But there's wars over this, and it's one reason why I like the fact that we do not have federal control of the schools. I like local control, so that local groups can decide what they want in their education. But
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Let's give a round of applause to Dean Dan Schwartz. One of the things that the Dean is working on is the Stanford Accelerator for Learning, and there's more information. If you scan the QR code, you can learn about what they're doing. Stanford is the university that is perfectly poised to lead the way in terms of the future of education and how they're working with the schools of engineering, business, computer science, and the Department of Education. Dean Schwartz is a pioneer. We're so glad to have him. So get some more information. And if you're interested in learning how you can be a part of the Stanford Accelerator for Learning, talk to Darcy over here, or you can always talk to me. Thank you for doing that. For the rest of you who are those virtually, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to bring more of these thought leadership events to your cities that you're in. So we will be coming to cities near you pretty soon. So happy to have you. And for those of you who are here at the home base in Austin, Texas, say hello to someone you haven't met before. We've got parents from all of our different schools here today. Say hi to someone, enjoy some food and drink, and the dean will be here for a little bit longer. And thank you for coming. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you.